Hello, dear unknown friends. I'm Samicus, and welcome back to the channel. Uh, this is the first official live stream on the channel. It's been quite a while since I've been rather active here, and I figured if I'm going to continue, I want to do things a little bit more off the cuff. I might not always be able to upload a video on Tuesdays consistently, but I do have every Wednesday available to me every week. So I'm hoping that in the events that I don't or am not able to upload a video, that I can at least do these evening live streams for everyone. If you see me looking over this way, it's because I have the live chat on a separate screen that's unfortunately not ideally placed, but it is there. If there's anyone who's watching right now, feel free to drop a hello, smiley face, any emoji that you please, so that I know you're all there. And I'm hoping to get enough people together here so that we can kind of go over the main subject of today's stream, which is whether or not we'll be seeing a resurgence of the Satanic Panic in 2025 and beyond. So, for anyone who is curious as to the purpose of, or the reason for my absence over the summer, or since the start of Lent, really, I've been going through a lot of chaos at my former employment that rendered it nearly impossible for me to upload or record anything consistently, let alone enough time in the day to be able to do the necessary reading and research that I tend to do on a daily basis. With that also came a lot of important legal matters that pertain to my fiance's immigration status. We are in the process of, at the time, we were in the process of officially processing additional documentation to the government for her, for them to issue her visa. She'll be coming over on the fiancé visa, and we will be getting married. We'll be getting married in an SSPX chapel, God willing. As it happens, the day that she flies in to the United States officially will be the 3rd of October. She will be flying out. She will be flying out tomorrow. Well, for her, it'll be tomorrow. Which happens to be the feast of Holy Guardian Angel, or of the Synaxis of the Angels, depending on your liturgical calendar. And I ask everyone that they pray for her safety. She'll be she'll be having a layover in Beijing, and I don't know how that's going to fare for her. It's the only part that has me worried. But once she's out of there, I'll feel a little bit better. So, oh, here, let me get us back into the dashboard here so I can see what we're doing. All right. Let's adjust a few things here. All right. There will be a slight lag between what I see in the chat versus my recording in real time. So I think what we'll do is we'll wait a little bit more. Hopefully some more people will make their way in. I'm gonna try to see if there's anybody who will be interested. Let's see. All right. Well, I think what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and we will we'll get started. I have I've selected for the beginning of the stream an article, or I should say a blog post by Mark Stavish. He is he's a well-researched gentleman in the realm of more pagan and Masonic varieties of Hermeticism over at the Institute for Hermetic Studies. And he recently had written a piece related to current events here in the United States. And I think there's some value in what he has to say, and plenty of things that we ought to consider. So I just wanted to kind of go through his piece, his arguments, and provide my own commentary on it. So we'll go ahead and we'll switch over. All right. So yes, this is from his, I guess we could call it a newsletter, Vox Hermes. It's The Assassination of Charlie Kirk and the Satanic Panic 2.0. This was the article that gave me impetus to that gave me impetus to make my video that I released yesterday. So we'll start off with at the beginning there. Quote, "We live in the midst of invisible forces whose effects alone we perceive. We move among invisible forms whose actions we very often do not perceive at all, though we may be profoundly affected by them." End quote, Dion Fortune. I was recently asked by several people to comment on the political assassination of conservative Christian social commentator Charlie Kirk. While a more detailed analysis is required, I'll point out the following and leave it to the reader to consider the points made and what it means to them as a practitioner of esoteric disciplines. What we know: Charlie Kirk was shot dead at a rally in front of thousands of people and his family. What we don't know: we do not know much more than the simple fact, than that simple fact. We are told a great deal. We can even very rationally surmise a great deal for a host of reasons, but that is not something we know. It is something we believe or are presenting as conjecture. What we know: the response to Kirk's death worldwide was staggering. He, along with the murdered Ukrainian woman Irina Zarutska a day earlier, have become not only martyrs but secular saints of sorts for a variety of populist and religious causes, again, worldwide. What we don't know: what the long-term reactions to this vast reservoir of psychic power is going to be. What we know: 2 days prior to Kirk's murder, an editor at the leftist online publication Jezebel published an article, since removed from their website, on how she hired a witch from an Etsy listing to curse Charlie Kirk. They insisted it was all in good fun and meant no harm. Why this matters: for over 10 years, the spiritual community has been increasingly infested with neo-pagans, witches, and some variations of Buddhist converts and magicians who have advocated the use of malefic magic for their specifically progressive political ends. This includes publishers as well as authors. And as I have stated repeatedly, it is interesting to see how the neo-pagan community has gone from "and harm ye none" and "we are not Satanists" to endorsing, advocating, and supporting a host of publications and organizations are either malefic or openly satanic for either commercial or political reasons. The collapse of ethics and adherence to the virtues as presented on the Tree of Life, the basis for classical initiation and spiritual progress, can mean only one thing: there will be hell to pay. So I'll pause there for a moment and just offer some brief commentary thus far. One of the things that needs to be pointed out is that what Mark here presents to us at the beginning is just a simple what we've got going on. I definitely agree with him on the premise that it's rather interesting to see that the progressive and neo-pagan types preach a harm ye none mentality, and yet when presented with contrary beliefs and positions to theirs, they quite easily become well, for lack of a better term, triggered. But what does it mean for them to be triggered? Like, what is the substance of that, rather than just saying it's just to use a term that's rather colloquial at the moment. I think what's important to point out, is for someone such as Charlie Kirk, he did at least have an open forum. Was his methodology necessarily all that impressive at the end of the day? I think in the wake of his death, we have sort of mythologized what it actually was that he was doing when he was at these campuses. And to be quite frank, I think a lot of his methodology is actually rather juvenile. Yes, he was very well read. Yes, he was knowledgeable. For sure, he was a devout Protestant, seemingly non-denominational evangelical, though his theology may have been. And I highly doubt that, well, when he went to the UK, there were a number of instances that ended up being caught on camera where he just simply was not able to muster up to the deep rhetorical reservoir that is the British academic scene, mainly because it is a type of dialectic that he's not used to having to contend with. Though his methods certainly worked very well here in the United States. And since we live in a very short-term memory paradigm, thanks to things like Instagram Reels and TikTok, the content that Kirk was able to put out was very effective. For good or for ill, I will leave that up to most people to discern for themselves, as that's not the subject of this stream. We'll go ahead and we will continue. If I can get this to cooperate for me. All right. It is unimportant if the editors of Jezebel or even the publishers of the political occult pulp don't believe that cursing really works. The fact that they ignore the fundamentals of what constitutes a healthy person and healthy society alone is what matters. So, we have what are fundamentally spiritually bankrupt materialists mocking not only the Christian faith of Kirk and wishing him harm, all in good fun, we are told, but we also have would-be practitioners going along with it for the ride. And they will be ridden, to be sure of that. Because either way, the power of the mind, be it materialist-based mass suggestions and media manipulation, or occult thought forms and the generation of an egregore, will not be abused without consequences. I agree with him there. In fact, that's something where the Christian faith and Mark Stavish tend to agree quite readily, regardless of whether you may believe in regardless of whether you believe in the efficacy of such practices. Nevertheless, if you only, even if you only believe in mimesis, eventually the mimesis will affect you. If that's the, if that's the paradigm that Jezebel is under. If Jezebel is disbelieving but are doing it for the yucks of it, under a more agnostic paradigm, then for sure the mimesis of it all at the end of the day, one way or another, it will have its fallout. Stavish continues, if we are lucky, we, and that means the esoteric community, publishers and writers like myself, that really means my family, will get through the next 2 or 3 years without seeing a Satanic Panic 2.0. And be clear, if it happens, it will be well-founded and deserved. Failure to enforce ethics as a baseline standard for entry into the practice of esotericism is not a strength. It is a profound weakness. The widespread publishing of books on malefic magic, even under the guise of political activism, is not an acceptable excuse. And to be doubly clear, the attempts by some in the esoteric community to have me and others I know cancelled or defunded for questioning the official narratives was also a form of malefic magic aimed at purging the community of any dissent. If all goes well, we will be ignored, but I doubt it. There will be some blowback, at least on the witchcraft end of the spiritual community. I do not expect it to last long, as the news cycle and attention cycle is considerably faster than when Satanic Panic 1.0 took place. However, it needs to be clearly understood that the original Satanic Panic was a phenomenon born of an unholy alliance of strange bedfellows, aspects of second-wave feminism, the emerging social work programs on the graduate degree level, fundamentalist Christians, and cliques within the Roman Catholic Church, all coming together with an irresponsible, ratings-driven media and government agencies, mainly local law enforcement, schools, and social services, that were underinformed, overwhelmed, and unable to adequately address the problems as they were told to protect the children. Be clear, strange things were happening. Children were abused, as they had been before and after, but the hysteria of the time prevented an understanding of the reality of child trafficking and sexual abuse. Political and financial agendas dominated the scene because that was the purpose all along. Any occult reality on the events was truly hidden, or rather invisible, but could be seen in the hysteria, emotionalism, dogmatisms, and rush to judgment that dominated the events of the period. It was less by the 1990s, when it morphed into the more generalized anti-cult movements, often linked to concerns about Scientology, with other spiritual movements and esoteric groups getting swept into the bin at the time. It was, and still is, a battle between various egregores. Unfortunately, we are currently looking at the emerging We Are Charlie movement that is worldwide, well-funded, and has a legitimate reason to be afraid of the Midnight Hag. A reason given to it by many in the witchcraft community themselves, either by open action of cursing or silence in their opposition to it. There is also an unspoken part. It will not simply be white conservative Christians who start to question the efficacy of malefic magic, as they already believe in it. It will be the middling, milquetoast cultural Protestants beginning to wonder if there is something to this evil thing after all, along with the host of legal and illegal immigrants that have come to the West in the tens of millions from cultures that already have a conviction in the efficacy of magic in general, and black magic in particular. They will be the potential supporters of the anti-cult movement as it unfolds here, a clear reversal of the 1990s, when part of the anti-cult movement was to stop the spread of various movements into not only Europe but also developing countries. Then, just for the sake of completeness, we throw in the increased interest over the late decade in folk magic among African Americans, a return to their hoodoo roots, so to speak, Native Americans with their various practices, and well, just about anybody you want to mention has some form of malefic magical practices in their closet or desk drawer somewhere waiting to be pulled out. How they may respond to its general appearance in wider society is unknown. That said, how the players for a potential Satanic Panic 2.0 will line up is not clear to me. It will most likely be a revival of the usual suspects, some of the usual slogans, and there will be unintended consequences that will be ignored. What will be different about this time is that the new and emerging religious movements and the neo-pagan witchcraft and some related groups will have brought it upon themselves for 30 years of poor choices. Open hostility to the mainstream culture at large, moving away from practice to having a political litmus test, and with that, a near lockstep identification and support of radically left or center causes and even candidates, all topped off with the very public advocacy and support of magic as a tool to those ends, and if a malefic tool, so much the better. As one sows, so shall they reap. Fall is here and the reaper is coming. Check your karmic bank balance and get it in the black, so to speak. Quote, I well remember it being said to me by an occultist of great experience that two things are necessary for safety in occultism: right motives and right associates. End quote. Dion Fortune. So, one second, getting back into the second monitor here. So, on the one hand, I will say this, and I'll begin with the finishing quote there at the end that he provides from Dion Fortune. And it's more or less this concept that there's safety in occultism. Again, this is where we get into discussions of the definition of what occultism is. As we know, the word comes from Latin, and it simply means what is hidden. Going off of Valentin Tomberg, which for any of you watching who have not seen any of my previous videos, you know that a great chunk of what I discuss and cover is related to subjects that were broached by Valentin Tomberg in his book Meditations on the Tarot. And in this book, he has his three categories of magic. The first type of magic is sacred magic. The second being personal, practical, or he sometimes refers to it as well as arbitrary magic. And then he has the third class, which he refers to as sorcery. And the distinction between these is on the level of personal or arbitrary magic. That's the magic of Aleister Crowley, the art and the science of causing change in accordance to will. In this instance, your will, your own personal will, your independent will. Then, a step below that, in the third category, of sorcery is where Tomberg makes the distinction of sorcery being the art and science of causing or facilitating change in accordance to a will that you cannot identify and or that you mistake as your own. And this is sort of where we see Mark Stavish and his commentary on current events dip into this idea that people are tapping into psychic forces that are that they either don't know exist and that they don't know they are participating in, thinking that it's they themselves who are performing their will, thinking that it's their will that they're carrying out, or mistaking it for God's will, depending upon who we're talking about is reacting to the events. And in the third category of magic, we have what Tomberg refers to as sacred magic. In arbitrary magic, it's our will be done. In sorcery, it is an unknown and unidentified will be done. And in sacred magic, it is God's will be done. Now, I know a lot of people often take issue using the word magic to represent things such as miracles and works of wonder that we see throughout Christian history. But we have to take into consideration that Tomberg was writing to a predominantly esoteric audience. There are definitely things in Meditations on the Tarot that are applicable to people who are not esotericists or occultists. However, Meditations is very much so a bridge. It is a bridge for misinformed and confused occultists who may be in a place where they're starting to question what it is that they have been up to all this time, to see that the things that they were seeking are actually fulfilled in the Catholic Church. And I know that there are a lot of Eastern Orthodox who would wish to lay claim to Tomberg, and for sure, given that he started, if I remember correctly, he started off as Lutheran, converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and then eventually made his way into the church and into the Roman Catholic Church. And when you read Meditations, you can clearly see the case that he's making for the Catholic Church. But to get back to the point, to get back to my commentary on the quote from Dion Fortune at the end of Stavish's piece, if we go off of Tomberg's categories of magic, we have to ask ourselves what is the type, what is the category of magic that Stavish is referring to by invoking Dion Fortune's quote there at the end, when she speaks of safety in occultism. Well, there is any of us who are in this space on the internet Any of us who are aware of, who study from an armchair perspective, and or those of us who are very conscientious about the encroachment of sorcery and the abuse of arbitrary magic in the world. We know that there's no that how do I put this? How do I put this? How do I put this? There is no safety in the occultism that Dion Fortune speaks of. Why do I say this? I say this because the type of occultism that Fortune was performing was sort of her own flavor of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And the magic from that order is through and through sort of teetering on the edge between arbitrary and personal magic and sorcery. So it teeters between the edge of doing your own will and doing the will of something you can't identify accurately. And so, and of course, unfortunately for people like Stavish and others, they as of right now don't really see that. They don't really see that type of occultism being within a Venn diagram of the second and third categories that Tomberg identifies. So yeah, there is no safety in that type of occultism, and as Stavish does rightly point out, there is going to be hell to pay when you're in that. When you're in those categories, when you're operating within them, it is very easy to fall into sorcery, to fall into not being able to identify whose will it is that you are doing. It's a state of confusion. And when you're in a state of confusion, you cannot operate safely at all. It's like having a weapon and thinking that you know how to safely handle it. And then you end up going and you use it in a way that it either was not intended or in a way that actually isn't safe at all. And eventually someone will get hurt. Or multiple people will get hurt. And that is a risk that people who fall prey to the trappings of personal magic and sorcery fall into. Now, why does Stavish point out, or why does he bring up a potential second satanic panic? Well, basically because of the deep national trauma that has resulted in the wake of Charlie's passing, and the various attempts to manipulate his memory in order to bring about favorable atmosphere for certain parties, certain interested parties. I don't need to go into that avenue here, as these days most people will know what I'm referring to. And there are better people on the internet than I right now who can go into detail about those subjects, about who is doing the manipulating of his memory and who is the potential biggest benefactor of doing so. With that said, when Stavish here starts to describe what the first Satanic Panic was, he sort of lumps it all into this gelatinous cube of feminism, social work programs, Protestant Christians, and certain cliques in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, what he means by certain cliques in the Roman Catholic Church, best guess, is probably the more traditional types. Likely folks who were part of the Latin Mass movement, since they tend to be the types who like to bring up Masonic infiltration, which I'm not discounting that there is or isn't. There's certainly evidence that there is some type of an infiltration occurring, not merely because Dr. Taylor Marshall wrote a book about it, but others have written about it. And there is a legitimate concern about the effects of the occult, scare quotes occult, on the Catholic Church at large. And we kind of are seeing some of the fruits of this, of the St. Gallen Mafia, and again, those are subjects that are better addressed by others besides myself, since I'm not one that has studied the receipts. But as Stavish is pointing out, he is pointing out in here that with the manipulation of Charlie's memory, with the trauma that has come with Charlie's death, that there, and especially with the reaction to it, it's all sort of culminating it's culminating to a point, or it likely will, where mostly the evangelical types will break out the pitchforks and the torches, and they will go to town, and they will have the weight of law enforcement behind them, because right now the United States is under the auspices of a Protestant dispensationalist administration. Now, this is where I want to get into. This is where I want to get into a subject related to Satanic Panic 2.0 as it applies to people who aspire to practice Tomberg's sacred magic, and to Catholics, and to a similar extent, the Eastern Orthodox Church. There is room there's room enough on the gallows for the ravishing Protestants. We'll start there. First, I'll go ahead. I'll take a look at the chat. I just want to say, related to the chat, I do have a 60-second timer, just to kind of keep it slow enough that whenever I'm looking at the chat, I can keep up with it. I'm a one-man show, and I don't have the mental bandwidth to read chat at the rate that someone like Asmongold is able to, or Taylor Marshall or Tim Gordon or some of these other types. So Red Ring Light, let's see, he says, I'm not really seeing any Satanic Panic 2.0 happening now. Christians have seen that the death of Charlie Kirk has had an effect more like Vader versus Kenobi. I would say to that, not yet. I don't. Stavish might be jumping the shark or jumping the gun. He might be a little bit. He might be a little bit hyperbolic, but I don't know. I'll get into my thoughts about that here in a moment. Let's see. The Golden Dawn and SOL Lodge systems are offshoots of the Protestant Masonic system. They have a fake hierarchy that tries to act like they have a magical version of apostolic succession. Yeah, that's actually very true. That's very true. The whole impetus behind the Freemasons in 1717 was basically Protestants realizing, oh crap, we just for 200 years now we've literally ousted all the realms of credibility that we had as Protestants, and decided to cut ourselves off from that. So, but God forbid we admit our mistake and go crawling back. So instead, we're going to do our own thing, but we have to protect it. Because even in countries where Protestantism is protected or favored by the royalty, we can still potentially be apprehended. So we got to keep it on the down low. And yes, you're right. It's a cheap imitation of apostolic succession and magisterial teaching. And one thing that you'll notice about that, especially with the Freemasons, is how many of their hats they hang on the whole Hiram Abiff thing. And why do they do that? The simple answer is because since they don't have the authority that the apostles had, and since they've decided to reject the Catholic Church that Christ founded, they have to fill that void with their own founding account. And in their case, they decided to tie it to the construction of Solomon's temple. And my contention is that it's because of the Freemasons and their efforts to do this, in their efforts to attach themselves to the construction of Solomon's temple through the Hiram Abiff account in the Old Testament. What they ended up doing is that got seeded into the Protestant churches, unlike what had ever happened prior. And the natural result of this, it ends up being dispensationalism. And it's because of dispensationalism that we find ourselves in the international kerfuffle that we have going on in the Fertile Crescent. Okay, and in that sense, one could take Tomberg's category of sorcery and apply it to dispensationalist Christians. That their prayers, that their actions and their efforts are a form of sorcery because they are confused as to whose will it is that they are doing. They think that it's God's, and it's just not. Period. End of statement. Let's see. But of course, the 19th and 20th centuries magical lodge systems were not continuations of an unbroken chain of initiation, and more importantly, did not and do not have the Holy Spirit guiding them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wish there was a way that I can... Wish there was a way that I could, like, react. Is there a way I can react? Yeah, sadly there's not. And I'm not going to accidentally delete anything. I don't want to delete any chats. Okay, so let me give my thoughts apart from Mark Stavish's about Satanic Panic 2.0. I'm going to leave aside the question of its probability. Even though I personally believe that it is possible, but I also believe that it's going to end up having some very unintended consequences as to who the recipients of the ire are going to be. And especially for anyone who's watching or who is subscribed to my channel, who aspires to a lot of the stuff that I cover, a lot of the practices that I touch upon and cover on the channel, of which I refer to as Sophiergy. Those of us who aspire to practice Sophiergy, or what Tomberg calls sacred magic, we will end up in the crosshairs. So if you've ever used herbal remedies, if you ever used any of St. Hildegard von Bingen's medicines that she lists in her Physica, if you have rediscovered the interesting import that classic medieval and Renaissance astrology has on medical diagnosis and psychological diagnosis, not from a standpoint of superstition, but from a standpoint of understanding that the law of correspondence is legitimate. And I mean, of course it is. We're told that they will be for signs, and so it begs the question: signs of what? Well, there's yes, we have some, like, it refers to signs of major import for salvation history, but there is nothing stopping it from being of import to an individual person, and it's all about temperance and prudence in how one practices that. But anyhow, that's getting off getting off the track a little bit here. Yeah, if you use any old remedies, grandma's remedies, if you've rubbed someone's head with an egg to free them of the evil eye, if you use sacramentals or holy water, if you say the rosary, if you attend mass, if you take communion, if you practice concentration without effort or prayer of the heart, if you do any of that, if you chant, if you sing Gregorian chant, or if you pray in chant, for an evangelical Protestant, it looks no different to them from witchcraft and sorcery. It just doesn't. And with the extreme effort that is going into the manipulation of Charlie's memory and legacy, especially as it concerns his attendance of Mass and his praying of the Rosary and whatever that may indicate, even just those small gestures that may or may not have landed him in conversion to the church, it doesn't matter to evangelical Protestant types. It just doesn't. The Protestants are truly puritanical, whether they wish to admit it or not. And it was because of the Protestants that the first wave of witch huntings was as egregious as it was. Of the witches' manuals, of the witch hunting manuals within the Catholic sphere, you have the Malleus Maleficarum was just completely, like, what's his name? Kramer. He was laughed out of the room. But the author of the Compendium Maleficarum, which I actually have, I have some readings from chapters in that book in my playlist Sources of Sophiergy. Like that book actually had more respect from the church compared to the Malleus Maleficarum. And it's while Red Ring Light may be of the persuasion that that a second Satanic Panic won't happen, given how much more polarized we are today, and how easily polarized we're manipulated into being, rationality just simply isn't going to take hold. If you are not familiar with the proto-psychologist Gustave Le Bon, he studied, before psychology was officially psychology, he studied the behavior and mentality of crowds. And he discovered through his research that the larger the crowd, the larger a crowd is, especially if they are behaving, if they are behaving similarly. Like if you have a crowd of people and they are all being provoked by the same input, they are more likely to respond homogeneously to the provocation. And the larger the group, the lower the overall IQ of the group becomes. And when you fall into the mid to low double digits, depending on the size of the crowd, you become incredibly easily manipulated. And so I see a potential for that. That's why I see a potential for a second Satanic Panic, just because of how frequently Gustave Le Bon has been proved correct time and time again. We see it with the rise of National Socialists in Germany. We see it with the rise of the Bolsheviks. We see it with the rise of communism in China. We even see it in the United States. Excuse me. We see it with FDR and everything he did. The New Deal. And a whole host of other things. So that is why I am a little bit more pessimistic of the idea that there won't be a second Satanic Panic. Let's see, got another comment from Red Ring Light. He says, lots of Protestants are currently converting to Orthodoxy, specifically because Protestantism has ignored the spiritual realms. No need to go to a church that is just materialism with morals. Yes, exactly. Yeah, between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, both are seeing a surge, a huge surge of conversions. I think it's a net benefit. We still have a lot of stuff between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, or churches. There are a lot of unresolved issues that I pray do get resolved. I would love to see a reunification, but I don't think that I'll see it in my lifetime. And I'm not going to pretend that like there aren't any issues as far as theology goes, and so on and so forth between the two. But for what is going on in the world today, we certainly do have a lot more in common than we do in difference when it comes to what is the purpose of civilization? What is the purpose of a nation or the state? What is the purpose of the ruler? What is the purpose of a country's laws and things like that? There's a lot that we can agree to in that sense, and I think that that's going to play a huge part in the time to come as we continue to inch ever closer to something I think will end up being worse than a second Satanic Panic. I do think, let's see, I do agree with Stavish on his one thought that it might be very short-lived. Just because, again, our short-term memory is quite atrocious today, especially amongst the youth. So yes, perhaps it will be very short-lived. I do think it will still have its cultural impact, however, because it will have its effect. it will sink into the subconscious, and then it'll get memory hold. And it's once it's memory hold that it'll be living in the subconscious. And once it's there, that's where it's going to stay, and it will manifest itself in our behavior and actions moving forward from that point on. It's just people won't remember it. They'll behave as if they do. And they'll question themselves. They'll ask, at some point they'll ask, it's like, why are we doing this? But no, aside from a second satanic panic, I think that there's a much graver issue that is on the horizon that has hallmarks of witch hunting hysteria of the 17th century. And unfortunately, it involves our elder brethren in the faith. Well, not in the faith, but our elder brethren of Abraham. We'll put it that way. And say, we are not in full communion, but in situations like Gaza, both the Latin and Greek Orthodox patriarchs stood side by side. Yes, it's beautiful to see. It truly is, despite our differences. Yeah. So what is this? What is this greater, more dangerous persecution that will be greater than a second satanic panic? We're already starting to see the groundwork being laid for it. We've been seeing the groundwork being laid for it for 25 years, if not more. The groundwork has only really been successful in growing to the point. That's not the right way to put it. It started it started in the 19th century. It attempted to get the blessing of the Pope in the early 20th century. And it finally gained its success in the Catholic sphere with the Second Vatican Council, specifically through the pastoral document Nostra Aetate. And unfortunately, as is oblivious to the Novus Ordo Catholics in the church, they have absolutely no concept, especially if they're over the age of 45, maybe over the age of 50, maybe. They have absolutely no clue, because they've also bought into Americanism, and they've also bought in, along with that, they've also bought into the errors of classical liberalism, which, as far as my read on it is, again, I'm not the expert on it. I would defer you to the Substack American Reformed. It's a really great resource that goes into deep discussions on topics like this. But yeah, classical liberalism is outright condemned in within the magisterium of the Catholic Church, for sure. And contrary to what many lay Catholics would believe, the Nostra Aetate is not doctrinally binding. It's not a declaration of dogma. It is pastoral. The Second Vatican Council was a pastoral council. And despite its positing that it is a despite the way that the hierarchy has behaved and the way that they have conducted themselves as if it were doctrinal, they themselves at the time of the council said it was not doctrinal in nature, that it was pastoral in nature. But no, so aside from a Satanic Panic 2.0 being the most pressing thing, I mean, I think it will occur. It will be short-lived, but the damage will be done. But it's what comes after, and what comes after is going to be much worse. It's going to be sort of the next cycle of preparation for the end times, in my opinion. And it will involve our elder brothers of Abraham. And it will be carried out not by their hand, but it will be carried out by the dispensationalist evangelical Protestants and the Pentecostals and any of the non-denominational Protestants who are friends of Israel. And they'll use, and I suspect that they will use the results of a second Satanic Panic to their advantage. They'll use whatever cultural tools come out of that are going to be used. And then, of course, they're going to use Nostra Aetate and the Second Vatican Council to bully Catholics into submission. Again, that's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong, and I pray that I am. I honestly pray that I am. Let's see some more chats. Let's see. For the other panic, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been banned by a member of that older Abrahamic faith. Yes. Yes, I am aware of that. In fact, I think I've even, and also the Ukrainian Catholic, the Uniate Catholic Church as well, as I understand it. And I did see where they turned one of the monasteries into a nightclub that is run by our older brothers. Let's see. Greetings from Spain. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I honestly didn't expect wrong password. I honestly didn't expect there to be very many people for my first stream ever. But I'm very grateful for all of you who have tuned in. My goal is to probably have these run about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So I'm probably going to cut it off at about 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in the US. Let's see. So, greetings from Spain. Thank you. Thank you very much. Quintandil, tell me, I notice your avatar, your profile pic on here, is one of the characters from the Tengwar. I'm just curious if you are well versed in any of Tolkien's languages. If so, um, if you find me on Facebook, whatever really good resources you have for that, I'd be more than happy to receive in a message. Because that I honestly, I can attribute my disposition to these topics. I actually can honestly say I owe them to Tolkien, because I always found it fascinating how someone as Catholic as Tolkien was wrote so favorably about a certain type of magic, but a magic nonetheless, and even referred to it as magic. Um, and that had always stuck with me. And then when I discovered Tomberg and read Meditations on the Tarot, it's like my mind was absolutely blown. And all of a sudden, a lot of the themes in Lord of the Rings suddenly made so much sense. Um, I've often wondered, um, if whether or not Tolkien and Tomberg may have ever met. And part of the reason I suspect that could have been a possibility is because of Tolkien did have sort of a tangential association with the Enigma project during the war. His expertise was consulted in order to try to break the German codes, the U-boat codes, and so in this sense, we know that we know that there was some contact between Tolkien and Alan Turing. I don't think necessarily as far as letters were concerned, but more so in like a professional capacity on location, wherever it was that they were working on these things. With Tomberg, when Tomberg went to England, he was part of he was invaluable in interpreting German radio waves. So again, I think that there's a connection, that there's a potential connection between what Tomberg was doing for the British government, what Tolkien was doing for the British government, and what Alan Turing was doing for the British government. Because when you read sort of commentary on Tolkien, you read about how, at least in a very recent book called Mount Doom, which I would highly recommend to anyone who has a love for Tolkien. If you want to go deep, into the symbolism of everything in Lord of the Rings, that not necessarily in terms of like how Tolkien connected it with Anglo-Saxon mythology, so on and so forth. No, deeper, more along the lines of like Jonathan Pajot. If you want to go deeper, highly recommend Mount Doom. If you search Mount Doom, Tolkien prophecies, there's a fantastic book written by two Catholic gentlemen who did a lot of research, and they're the ones that made this connection with the Enigma project between Tolkien and Turing, and their contention is that the One Ring was sort of a metaphor that Tolkien created for the vision Turing had for computers, which, interestingly enough, is where we're at today with the artificial intelligence stuff. So, like, the One Ring is AI. You know, you think you can use it for good, but but if we were to wield it, we would be capable of things too great and terrible to imagine, right? But I suspect that there might be a chance that Tolkien and Tomberg may have had discussions with each other that I don't think were ever written down. That, or they were seeing the same things and were concerned. That might be the more likely possibility, but I'm going to hold out hope that they may have actually met each other and may have had some form of influence, some slight influence on each other before pen was ever put to paper for either of them. Because the reason that I think this is there's so much in Meditations on the Tarot that is reflected in the themes in the Legendarium, in Tolkien's Legendarium. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I tried to do a video where sort of rambling about this, but I don't think I did. I don't think I did much success. I don't think I had much success in that. So, Ryan says hello from Canada. Hi. I have a sister-in-law who is from Toronto. So, and she's a very fun person, and my family is very blessed to have her joining our family. Let's see. Art Danks says, do you think the persecution against true Christianity from our older brothers will be on the basis of so-called anti-Semitism? It's easy to assume that. And it's easy to assume that because it's easy to assume that because it's what we've been bombarded with for the last however many weeks, months, in recent memory, years, especially with the efforts of folks like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Dave Smith, who are not friends of the Israeli government. I can see a case be made where they might start equating the their religion to their secular government. Some of them have made that claim already. Bibi has, to my knowledge, Bibi has not made an overt claim of that. It's sort of been tacit. It's been subtle. But he hasn't come outright and said that Zionism is the manifestation it is the manifestation of our people and our religion. Here, give me 1 second. I'm gonna grab myself a quick drink. There we go. All right. Starting to get that little tickle in my throat. But yeah, let me get logged back in. I really should change the settings on this, but I don't want to do it midstream. So I'll just keep typing that in. All right. But yeah, Art, is as far as the will they use anti-Semitism? Yeah, if they finally more popularly start to connect their religion to their secular ambitions, then yes, they will continue to use they'll use that to sort of re-amplify and reinvigorate the condemnation of anti-Semitism, because in the case of our older brothers, their religion is an ethno-religion, so they can already condemn Christianity as being anti-Semitic just on the face of it being against their religion, even though Christianity is the fulfillment of Old Testament Judaism. And we have to remember that that Judaism as it stands today, post the crucifixion and resurrection, is not sanctioned by God. Period. We have to remember this, because if we don't, then we end up in the same place as Schofield and the rest of modern Protestantism as it stands right now. So yeah, I think if they can find a way to reinvigorate the term anti-Semitism by connecting the religion, the ethno-religion, to their secular ambitions, which they kind of already do by funding Protestant pastors. Again, I'm not the one to come to for that line of inquiry. That's best suited to others who have the resources and know where to look better than I do. But that, from watching and reading their material, that is what I understand, is that, you know, the evangelical pastors are the ones who are literally being funded to make the religious case for the secular government, whereas the secular government of Israel itself, as of yet, has not overtly come out to say so on their part. So we'll see. We'll see. Red Ring Light says, or asks, have you heard any of Jonathan Pajot or the Podfathers from the Lord of Spirits discussing the reenchantment of the West? Yes. In fact, I've listened to quite a lot of those podcasts, and I am typically a big fan of Jonathan Pajot. I do worry about his association with Jordan Peterson, not from any sense of jealousy, because I want Jordan Peterson to become Catholic, since his wife's already made her way over, but mostly because I worry about Peterson's influence onto Pajot. As I don't find Peterson anymore to be as wholesome as we thought he was. He certainly has played his part in reinvigorating people's thirst for depth in their lives, and that is valuable. It really is, but yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to kind of notice the Jonathan Pajot of before felt like he had more oomph to his message than he does since his extensive interactions with Peterson, the folks over at Daily Wire. So yeah, I think that there's unfortunately been an ever so slight compromise in Peugeot's methods. But to the question, have I heard of the reenchantment of the West? Yes, I have. I've also heard from a gentleman who also happens to be Eastern Orthodox, Scott Mannion over at the Greenwood Fellowship. Fantastic channel. Of all the people on the internet right now who talk about Tomberg, it's as far as it concerns the practice of concentration without effort that Tomberg speaks about, and a lot of and as far as like the phenomenology of everything that Tomberg's going on and on about, Scott Mannion is the guy. He's the guy to go to for that, for sure. Whereas my focus here is more so on taking Tomberg's exposition on sacred magic and the magical sense that he talks about, and putting that all into practice, and also sort of studying the ways in which it already has been put into practice, and assessing whether or not the ways that it already has been are efficacious enough to reenact, to also perform today. That's my focus. Whereas Scott, he's as far as like some of the other aspects of Tomberg, he's the guy. And then when it comes to the more social teaching aspects, when it comes to more of the rebuilding of Christendom aspects that we see in Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot, the person that I would point to for that would actually be Roger Buck, who actually credits Tomberg as being Tomberg and the Sacred Heart of Jesus as the means through which he found his way into the Catholic Church. And he's even written an autobiography about that experience, which, I must say that I have yet to read that book. I really should. It's just unfortunately my TBR list is colossal, to say the least. But is the reason I bring up Scott Mannion in this discussion about the reenchantment of the West. Scott's idea is that the West as it is, that it needs to die. Not because he wants it to disappear. He says that the West needs to die because if it doesn't die, it doesn't resurrect. And I find that to be an incredibly hopeful message. And any of us who are Christians should be able to, like, in the back of our head, we should be able to get that little tickle that says, "Oh yeah, that's right." So yeah, that's those are my thoughts on the question of re-enchanting the West. And I think the thing of the West that needs to die is classical liberalism. Liberalism, the philosophies that gave us modern statecraft and nation, the concepts of the modern concepts, the we'll say the post-Enlightenment concepts of nationhood, statehood, and statecraft, like that is what needs to die, in my opinion. The Enlightenment needs to die. And in the case of the Enlightenment, it needs to die and get thrown into Gehenna. Whereas the positive aspects of the West need to die and resurrect. And I think that is what we're witnessing. We are witnessing the death of the West. And once it dies, it will be purified of the dross. It'll be purified of its mistakes. And it will come roaring back in a blaze of glory. Whether or not that means that's going to be the end times, or another one of the cyclical preparations for the end times that the church fathers talk to us about, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But I think what will come with that resurrection of the West will be a re-enchantment, because it'll be an opportunity for us to finally shake off the we'll finally be able to shake off the throes of scientistic thinking, the type of paradigm that has quite literally cut us off from being able to perceive the spiritual, which is what it's what Protestantism did, or it's what Protestantism initiated. Let's say Art Dank said, perhaps the West should die so it can resurrect, to be in communion with the Eastern Church. Just my thought. Well, so let's see here. I think one of the things that is a challenge for Eastern Orthodoxy, and I say this with all the love in the world, is the ethnic component. A lot of people I've spoken to who had once considered Orthodoxy and chose not to and ended up in the Catholic Church instead, they always bring up to me the question of the ethnicity of the Eastern churches. You know, if you're and even in the Unit churches, there's an element of that. So like in the Byzantine Catholic churches, more often than not, you're going to run into people who are Polish or even further Eastern European. Ukrainian Catholic Church, the Ukrainian Uniate Catholic Church, for example, obviously is their attendees are predominantly Ukrainian in descent. The same is true for like the Maronites are most of the time Lebanese and Syriac. The Melkites are more often than not the Greeks. You know, the one thing about the Roman Catholic Church is, while it does have the moniker of Roman, with the understanding of what the papacy is, which I know that there are still some unresolved things thanks to Vatican I that we still have to deal with, that we hoped would have been dealt with at Vatican II, but were not. But one of the things about the papacy, generally speaking, is that having the Primarch bishop of all the bishops, having that universal jurisdiction is what gives the Catholicity to the Catholic Church. And by Catholicity, the word Catholic, the root of the word Catholic being Catholicos, meaning universal. Christianity is supposed to be universal. And yes, the different ethnicities are grafted upon the mystical body of Christ, and each have their own unique and beautiful expression, especially liturgically and culturally, and so on and so forth. But I think there's a lot. I think if the West dies, if the West dies, when it resurrects, if there is to be a union between the Eastern and Western churches, the expression of that has to be there would have to be some semblance of a unified expression. And the unified expression would be in the deposit of faith, not strictly speaking the culture and the liturgies. So, do I think when the West resurrects, we'll finally have that unity? Maybe. I hope so. Yeah, I hope. Let me get logged back in here. Yeah, and I think that's what, and I think that's what Tomberg saw. Tomberg clearly had this vision that something was approaching, that arbitrary magic and sorcery were going to meet their natural conclusion. Whether or not he knew that was going to end up looking like artificial intelligence or what have you is beside the point, but he certainly had a feeling that the machine of it was going to take over, and that we would be unknowingly assenting to the machine to the point where there was going to be a spiritual crystallization. He often uses the word crystallization to refer to a hardening, like a hardening of the heart, a hardening of the spiritual sense and spiritual perception, to the point where we can't see it anymore, and then we are at the whim of the machine. Ahriman is the concept that Rudolf Steiner uses. Just as an interesting observation of this idea of the crystallization, the specialization, and the hardening of the heart, I know it's very easy for us to point the finger at artificial intelligence and say that that's what he was talking about. Like, that's the machine that we should be scared of. I would posit that the actual spirit of Ahriman, the Ahriman principle, if you will, was actually initiated when England made usury an institution. When the first banks in England began to legally practice usury, that was the machine. Because since then, since that point, we have had all of human activity and culture redirect its attention and its efforts towards the pursuit of feeding debt, of attempting to satisfy debt. So I think that I think that is the machine. Capital meets usury is the machine, is Ahriman. It's mammon. We've allowed mammon to become the god that we worship, that we live our lives around. And it's become embedded in institutions, and it has hardened our hearts. I would maybe even argue that the ones that have been practicing usury in the most egregious sense since ancient times, especially since the crucifixion, have succeeded in infecting us all with their hardness of heart through the pursuit of usurious capital. We have become, as modernity, we have become spiritually equivalent to our elder brethren. So, let's see. Red Ring Light says, while some Orthodox churches can indeed... Oh, darn it. Right as I was about to read, I promise next time I will have this set up so that the screen doesn't shut off on me or go to sleep. Let's see. Red Ring Light says, while some Orthodox churches can indeed be ethnocentric, they also preserve the magical folk traditions of their ancestors. Absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And that is one thing that I find some missionary efforts in the past in the Roman Catholic Church. I think that it was a mistake on some of the missionary efforts on their part to have tried to extinguish that. Now, we also have to be careful here when we discuss about this subject, because there are also many instances from the Catholic missionaries where they were able to purify and cleanse and baptize practices and means of understanding the spiritual, so that they were little o orthodox. One of the best examples of that is Guadalupe. This book's fantastic, by the way. Guadalupe, the language that Our Lady used in her dealings with Juan Diego, the things that, like the visual experiences that Juan Diego was having, had their basis in the pagan flower world prophecies that his native culture had held for 1,000 years. So there are instances where those folk practices get baptized. And then, of course, with Guadalupe, you have millions converted when the tilma, after the tilma was revealed and the word got out. So yeah, so that I think that's but I think that's right, Red Ring. Um, the Eastern Orthodox are definitely better at preserving those folk traditions, and this is where for the West, for the Roman Catholic Church, this is where I think something went. The seeds of something wrong happened. Both. Something happened at the Council of Trent, so you have the Protestant revolt that began with Martin Luther in 1517, and amongst all his contemporaries, leading up to the quote unquote counter Reformation. I would rather call it the counter revolution, where we end up with the Council of Trent. And while there was a lot of good for the Catholic Church that came out of Trent and clarity, I do think that there was some capitulation towards the Protestants. Because up until that point, you had the Protestants saying that, all the Catholic Church is just Babylon. They're Babylon. They're practicing magic rituals and the occult, and they're doing all these things that are pagan, and it's pagan this and pagan that. And we're the real church. We're the real followers of Jesus because we don't do any of that stuff. And so, and people died. Like people were being burnt. People were being drawn and quartered. Catholics were being prosecuted off and on across all of Europe at the hands of the Protestants. So just because of this misunderstanding of what these things were, and the complete rejection of the authority of the magisterium and deposit of faith. And so where the church, I believe, may have capitulated to the Protestants was in trying to they tried to stave off the heat that they were getting. They tried in small ways to try to brush off the accusations by making some changes to the way that they talked about the faith. You also start to see more after the Council of Trent. You do start to see more suspicion of mystics occur. And then in the 17th century, we have the witch hunt hysteria happen. Thankfully, one of the nice things that came out of the witch hunting trials was the discovery of the St. Benedict medal, which I have videos on. I really like. Just a pipe dream of mine, as an aside, I would love to do a documentary about the Catholic Church's most famous magical amulet ever, being the St. Benedict medal. But have it actually be a legitimate documentary where I go and I interview people who are historians and anthropologists about what amulets are, and the different kinds that there are, and scholars about monasticism. I'd love to do a full-blown documentary of that if ever I had the opportunity to do so, which I don't think I ever will, but it's just a pipe dream, and I pray that someday I'll be able to go on location to the Metten Monastery and ask to see the mural. I want to see the mural that Don Prosper talks about in his treatise on the Benedict medal. But anyhow, excuse me. So yeah, well, we've got about 4 minutes left. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody who tuned in, even if it was just 4 or 5 of y'all. It's more than I was hoping to have, and if you missed any of the beginning, I hope that once the video uploads, you can get on to the recording, the replay, and watch any of the sections any of the stuff from the beginning that you may have missed. And I'm hoping that I can continue doing these live streams with God's grace. And like I said, every Wednesday I have available to me. So if I'm not able to upload a video on Tuesdays for whatever reason, I'll still at least be able to live stream from 5 to 7 p.m. And yeah, and if you enjoyed the live stream, and if you enjoy any of my videos, if you haven't yet, if you haven't subscribed, please feel free to subscribe. I hate having to do the plug. It kind of feels disingenuous, but supposedly it does work from what I've been told. But yeah, if you can like, share, subscribe, bell icon, all that fun stuff, and especially share if you can. If there are groups or circles on the internet that I am not part of, that you think my content may be fruitful for, if you want to share all of that there, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I hope that the word can get out that this is a thing, that the live streams are now a thing. The idea for the live streams are that is that I'll have, like, not that yesterday's video was a short form video, but that I'll have some kind of a short form video, preferably no more than 30 minutes. I know yesterday's was an exception. And then have Wednesday be an opportunity for us to do a live stream about the topic of yesterday's video, to kind of go into more detail about it, have fruitful discussion, and all that, and then do it again the next week. Because I really do think one of the things that the channel is missing is more of a community element, and I think that by doing these live streams, should be able to have some semblance of fellowship. Because a lot of the times it's really hard to kind of talk to the air when there isn't anyone on the other side yet listening until after I've edited it and so forth. Not that I do much editing. But anyhow, so that's 7 o'clock. I wish you all God's blessings. And if you ever need me to add any of your intentions to my book of charity, feel free to message me. You can message me on Facebook. You can also message me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Sophiergist. Unfortunately, I tend to get fairly spicy over there, so I try to limit my time on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. Most of my interaction I have is on Facebook. So if you want to send me a DM in Messenger or on X, feel free. On Facebook, I'm just Ingiotisamicus. Again, on X, I am at Sophiergist. Any intentions, feel free to share, and I'll be sure to include them in my prayers. So, thank you all so much, and I'll end us all with the sign of the cross. In nomine Patris et Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Till next week, dear unknown friends.